Britain's economy has slumped back into recession after contracting in the first 3 months of 2012. The Office for National Statistics says Britain's gross domestic product fell 0.2% in the first quarter of 2012. Prime Minister David Cameron says he's disappointed by the new figures. News Corporation Chairman Rupert Murdoch has rejected accusations that he used his media to play puppet master to a succession of British leaders. He is being grilled in an inquiry on his relationship with British politicians since 1970s. He said he has, quote, never asked a prime minister for anything. A U.S. military judge has refused to dismiss charges against WikiLeaks suspect Bradley Manning. Manning's lawyers had said that the charges must be dropped because prosecutors were slow in sharing required information with the defense. Manning has been slapped with 22 charges, including aiding the enemy that carries the death penalty. 2 military officers have been killed in separate incidents in Syria. Syrian media say the officers were both killed in the southern province of Daraa. This, as the French foreign minister says, the UN Security Council should consider use of force against Damascus if Kofi Annan's peace plan fails. Palestinians have rallied in Gaza in solidarity with prisoners on hunger strike in Israeli jails. The protesters marched from the UN office toward the Red Cross headquarters in the besieged coastal enclave. Some 1,200 Palestinians are on an open-ended hunger strike in Israeli jails, demanding better jail conditions. French presidential front-runner François Hollande says if elected, he will renegotiate the EU's fiscal pact aimed at reducing debt across Europe. Hollande promised to send his European partners 4 proposals to amend the agreement. The pact calls on EU countries to adopt budget balancing measures. Thousands of people have rallied in Japan's capital as an Asia-Pacific Free Trade Pact ahead of Prime Minister Yoshihiko Noda's visit to the United States. Protesters say the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership in Washington will pressure Japan to deregulate insurance, investment, labor, and intellectual property rights. And Norwegian mass murderer Anders Breivik has told his trial court that an initial report that found him legally insane is based on evil fabrications. A second psychiatric examination has found him sane. Breivik has admitted to a bomb and gun attack that killed 77 people last year, but denies criminal responsibility.
Hello and welcome to Press TV News Analysis. I'm Kaveh Taghvai. The headlines read, UK is back in a recession due to 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. But analysts have said that UK has been in a recession for quite some time. Is the government preparing the austerity-weary people in the UK for additional or revised austerity cuts? In this news analysis, we'll examine the state of UK's economy and how it fares to other weak economies in Europe, especially countries in the Eurozone who are suffering from the debt crisis, such as Italy and Spain.
Britain has sunk back into recession, its first double-dip downturn since the 1970s, though some experts argue that the economy never recovered from recession. The Office for National Statistics says the GDP shrank by 0.2% between January and March, following a 0.3% contraction in the fourth quarter of last year. A recession is defined as 2 straight quarters of contraction. The figures pile more pressure on the government to step up efforts to boost the economy.
These are very, very disappointing figures. I don't seek to excuse them. I don't seek to try and explain them away. And let me be absolutely clear. There is no complacency at all in this government in dealing with what is is a very tough situation that frankly has just got tougher. I believe the truth is this: it is very difficult recovering from the deepest recession in living memory, accompanied as it was by a debt crisis.
The UK's economy contracted by 7.1% during the 2008-2009 recession. Experts paint a gloomy picture of the economy in the near future.
If you factor in the existing national debt, the deficits, the future liabilities for pensions and healthcare, and of course the aging population, the fiscal picture is bleak for a number of years to come.
Finance Minister George Osborne says the government needs to continue the painful austerity measures as the country's budget deficit still totals over 8% of the GDP. That's higher than that of most of the embattled Eurozone economies. Osborne warns the difficult situation in Britain could turn into a disaster.
The last thing we need in a situation like this is for Britain to go down the path of Spain or Italy or, God forbid, Greece, where you just lose complete confidence in the world and your ability to pay your debts. And then Britain, as I say, would have a difficult situation turned into a completely disastrous one.
All this comes as Britain prepares to host the Olympic Games. The Games are believed to leave a long-term legacy of debt and will further aggravate the embattled economy.
At a time of, harsh economic austerity in this country, many people are asking the questions about these Olympic Games. Can Britain really afford to spend billions on what is, in fact, a vanity project for the country? What is, in fact, perhaps might lead to a short-term boost in certain industries, like the construction industry in East London, but will leave a long-term legacy of debt.
Well, let me introduce our guest. CEO of Bank to the Future, Simon Dixon, joins us from London. We have Director of Council on Hemispheric Affairs, Larry Burns, joining us from Washington, and international economist from the Fundación Alternativas, Manuel de la Rocha, who joins us via Skype from Madrid. Well, gentlemen, thank you for joining us here at the Press TV News Analysis. Simon Dixon, I'm going to go first to you. The UK being back in a recession, while some claiming that it never recovered based on the crisis, the 18-month crisis that it was in from the year 2009. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I've been saying for an awful long time that we never got out of the recession at all. We have to remember that everything we've done in the UK has not changed the situation in any way. We're still in an economy which is deeply dependent upon debt. We have to continually increase that debt, and no more money is getting into any kind of production, any kind of business, any kind of job creating activity. So we're only alive right now, really, people living month to month because of low interest rates, and so we haven't really ever changed the situation.
People living month to month, that does not sound too optimistic. What has caused this to reach this point, and why is it not coming out of this?
Well, none of our politicians are addressing the real issues, and you have to remember that the economy that we live in today, when we've built an economy which is dependent upon debt, the only way to grow our economy is if we actually take on more debt. And if we want less debt, then we have to have less money. So what you're actually seeing right now is a function of politicians arguing about whether we want to get people in more debt to grow the economy, or whether we want to decrease that debt by money disappearing from the economy right now. So we're in a catch-22.
Well, let's see, Larry Burns, if I may ask you this question, what you think about perhaps what the government is doing. Perhaps, obviously, the government knows that it was in a recession, never grew out of it, doesn't want the public to know, but now it's made it official. Do you think the government there is preparing its people for more austerity cuts maybe, or revised, deeper austerity measures?
Well, the government itself is not particularly strong. And this becomes a cardinal fact in assessing Britain's prospects of making a transit to safer financial shores. The lack of political will in Britain is a very compelling factor. Also, the numbers go against an early recovery. basically because direct foreign investment isn't going into Britain in the customary amounts, and the country has to buy expensive commodities abroad, while the hard capital goods represent a sagging segment of the economy. So there's a lot of negativities going against Britain making it safely, and very few positives. And I'm a pessimist on this.
Well, let's refer to the bank crisis, Manuel de la Rocha. Wasn't it made worse by austerity measures introduced last year in the absence of what's been called a comprehensive growth plan? I mean, why weren't austerity cuts paralleled with a growth plan?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, I think the reason is because in Europe there seems to be some focused and obsession with austerity measures as the fundamental and final objective of all the policy, economic policy of every government. And while I agree that, you know, there needs to be some plan to reduce debt levels in European countries, doing so at the same time in such a strict way at the same time as the economies are pretty much stagnant or in actual recession, what is doing is making things worse, because in a situation where consumers, households are not consuming and companies are not investing, if government retrenches even further and in such an accelerated pace and throughout Europe at the same time, what we are seeing is that we are making things worse, and it's very difficult to reduce the deficit, and obviously debt levels will never be reduced. And ultimately, this is the result. The result is more recession. So I don't see how these austerity measures by themselves can get us out of this situation.
Well, Simon Dixon, we know that the UK is not going to swerve from its austerity cuts. It may even revise it. We don't know that yet. But let's look at what some of the other countries in Europe have said. Let's hone in on what François Hollande has said, that France is not going to sign up to the Eurozone budget treaty if he is elected. How is that going to affect Europe's economy as a whole, not to mention France's and UK?
Yeah, well, I think...
Go ahead, Simon Dixon.
Okay, yeah, well, I think what we're seeing right now is the breakdown of Europe. Europe is essentially a big Germany right now, and with France making threats to leave, that's no good sign for Euro. But it's an experiment which really hasn't worked, and it's an idea whose time has come, really.
And let's look at what has been said from across the Atlantic. Larry Burns, in terms of the Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke, who said Europe's woes could threaten the U.S. recovery. Do you think that's a way of passing the buck by the U.S. when the Federal Reserve Chairman says that? I mean, what is the responsibility of the Fed and the U.S. administration for this really slack recovery?
Well, if you want an economic answer to that political question, let's look at the United States' role vis-a-vis Syria. I don't think that the American political structure is ready for a venturesome debate or heroic actions on the part of a president seeking re-election in a political climate that's hostile to his prospects. So if you have a timorous series of policy sorties taking place, you're not going to get solutions. And if you put pressure on the countries that are now being affected by worsening economic times, you can generate great social conflicts, as we've seen in Bolivia and other Latin American countries, which is sure to spread elsewhere in the third world.
Simon Dixon talked about these low interest rates, Manuel de la Rocha. Now, the report by the European Central Bank has criticized, it's a report that has criticized, it claims that it helped quell the recovery by increasing interest rates for banks refinancing twice in 2011, making it harder for them to lend to governments as well as consumers and companies in the real economy. How much increasing banks' interest rates do you think are responsible perhaps for stifling the recovery?
Well, I don't think that is the key issue. I mean, the level of interest rates as they are today. I mean, I think the problem, at least as far as the Eurozone is concerned, and mainly some of the peripheral countries, certainly in Southern Europe, the problem is that a lot of these banks are having real difficulties in their balance sheets. I mean, they are loaded with bad loans from the housing bubble. And what we see in countries in Southern Europe, which is what is really stalling the recovery, is that banks are not lending. And I think the European Central Bank has done a good job in these last few months of by the injection of liquidity, the two auctions of about over 500 billion euros, but unfortunately what we saw is that the banks have taken this liquidity, very cheap liquidity, and they have bought government bonds, some of them, but they are not lending out to the economy. So we are in, and mainly because they have to deleverage, and there are new capital requirements for them, very stringent, and they are in a very difficult situation. So unless more stronger and more forceful measures are taken at the European level to clean the bank's balance sheets, they will not lend. I think the problem is that they have very bad loans in their balance sheets.
Which brings back the question, and this has been the blame that has been passed to the banks. Simon Dixon, how much are they at fault again? And since we are looking from 2009 and now it's 2012.
Sure, well, every issue is a banking issue that we're seeing right now. However, the banks are simply operating within a framework in which government is allowing them to operate. So there's nothing that they're doing that they can't, and they're acting rationally given the situation that they're in right now. They'd rather lend to property than rather get that in business. They'd rather lend to consumer debt rather than get that into anything job creating. So really, while we're in a mess that's created by the banks, the change can only happen at the political government level.
Well, you mentioned a change at the political government level. What does that mean? For the government not to go for borrowing, I forget, what is the 425 billion pounds that this Lib Dem government has gone with Prime Minister David Cameron in terms of what they have borrowed or projected to borrow through 2013?
Yeah, so, I mean, we're in this crazy economy where essentially banks are lending money to the government when they don't really have the money in the first place to actually lend it. So how we can discuss when government have actually given banks the ability to create money, how we can actually discuss these situations, how we can recover that is the absurd situation that we're in today.
Larry Burns, the UK economy is in a recession. Then we look at the Eurozone countries. Italy, that could face a deeper than expected recession. Spain, I'm going to quote the Treasury Minister there, Cristobal Montero, who has said Spain is in an extremely fragile moment. I mean, is Europe's economy going to see any type of recovery? Are they going to see a light at the end of the tunnel, or what they're seeing is a train that's colliding head-on and it's going to break their economy apart?
I think that there's probably a significant disparity between the behavior of the chief financial actors in Europe and the IMF and the World Bank, but it's not necessarily the end game. There's a lot of bluffing taking place right now, and that becomes part of the strategy. But at the end of the day, these nations need each other. And there's no way of building an effective firewall that will separate the weaker economies from the stronger ones. And I think that some of the chief culprits in this whole mess, like Spain, is based on the assumption that they will be rescued before they drag down the whole structure.
When we look at both sides of the Atlantic, Manuel de la Roche, we are seeing one of the key figures, many of it is key, but one of them is the unemployment. Steady in the U.S., looking at the UK, their unemployment rate is still probably one of the highest that it's had. Why is it that they are not able to decrease that? Does it have to deal with the government's lack of planning behind what we discussed earlier, and that's spurring some kind of growth, whether it's from the manufacturing down to consumer confidence?
Well, certainly. I mean, here the key is the lack of growth. I mean, unless the economy recovers and gets back to robust growth figures, it's very difficult to see, job creation. Or in the case of the UK and the US, they are coming from a housing and construction bubble, and they need to shift resources. The economy needs to shift resources into other sectors which are growing, and that takes some time. In the case of the Eurozone, what we are seeing is that many countries are not only not generating new jobs, but in fact they are destroying new jobs. So here the key is growth. And there should be much more focus from the governments into job creation and economic growth, whereas it looks like all the priority is based on austerity, under the assumption, in my opinion, false that once the debt and deficit levels come down, then the financial markets will regain confidence, and by then they will start lending. Banks and financial operators will start lending again, and confidence will make economic growth. But my point is that you cannot create jobs by just using austerity measures. I mean, you are giving such a hard medicine to this ill patient that you can end up killing it. And you see, we don't see the end of the tunnel. And so I would advocate for a complete change of course, more in the lines of the policies followed by the United States these days.
Simon Dixon, I see you nodding your head. Why don't you give us your comments of what our guest there in Madrid said?
Yeah, so the key to turning around the unemployment figures in the UK is we need to get more money to the business sector. The small business sector. In the UK, 60% of all jobs are responsible from the small business sector. At the moment, the banking sector is just redistributing money to the speculative sector, to speculation money, creating more money, and to pushing up property prices beyond control, all of which have no effect on the employment of our economy. So we really need to start looking at measures of how we're going to get more of the loans and the money to the job creating small business sector in the UK.
How much time is it going to take for this? It doesn't sound like it should be that difficult. But here we are 3 years later. It's 2012. And here we are looking at a recession in the UK.
Yeah. Well, I mean, simply because we're still looking at, if the government get their way with their policies that they're putting together right now, essentially we're looking for another housing bubble in order to stimulate an economy by keeping those interest rates low. But they've got to look at how we can get more of that money away from pushing up property prices and look at how we get that into job creation. And that could take a long time under the current policies that we're following, because we're not really getting much effect on how much money is getting into the real economy, the productive economy, the job creating economy.
And Larry Burns, can this parallel what's going on in the United States? We're still looking at the unemployment really not moving much. I'm not even sure if some of the numbers that are given are what's actual, because what's on paper and what's really existing is a lot more. How can you compare perhaps the U.S.'s economy versus the UK, and then how they play hand in hand with each other?
Well, I think that probably the UK would like to exchange its position with where the United States is right now. That is, growth isn't spectacular, but it's certainly taking place. And as a result of it taking place, the government is defanged from its ability to resort to maximum initiatives that would safely usher the economy to a safer side. I still believe that the ultimate solution to this crisis is a revisiting of the whole standard of living sector on a global basis, where a majority of the population are destined to be poor and live under terrible circumstances, while the others, even those in economic stress, live lives of favoritism and benefit. As long as you have that disparity existing, you're going to have a great deal of social tension, and that means domestic repression as well as a more fiery social agenda. And I think that our world leaders have to acknowledge to themselves that it's time for great political courage rather than revanchism that is badly needed.
Let me ask our guest, Manuel de la Rocha, since you're from Spain there, what you think about Spain's Treasury Minister Cristobal Montano, who said Spain is in an extremely fragile moment. We know how Spain has been in the headlines regarding what is going on with their economy.
Well, I mean, I think it only reflects the reality of a situation, the fragility of the whole Eurozone economic crisis, whereby, you know, we have had rescues of countries like such as Portugal, Greece, and Ireland, but unfortunately, and Spain seems to be next in line, but unfortunately, Spain is too big to be rescued. So, you see, if Spain falls, it would look like the whole Euro project would fall apart, and that would have massive implications. The Spanish government is just following, you know, by the heart and letter the policy direction that has been set out in Brussels and in Berlin.
813.
And unfortunately, there's not much they can do because most of the solutions of the Spanish crisis lie out of the control of the Spanish government. They are in Brussels and in Berlin, so they need to build coalitions with Berlin, with Italy, with the government of Monti, with maybe with François Hollande if he wins the upcoming election, to put growth and employment in the front of this agenda and change some of the policies that are taking place in Brussels and really build an economic governance for the Eurozone so that the European Central Bank can start taking policy decisions in the same way as the Federal Reserve or the Bank of England does to protect its own currency so that we will not have speculators against
I'm sorry
the euro.
to jump in. Unfortunately, we're fresh out of time. Manuel de la Rocha, we appreciate that. International economist at the Fundación Alternativas from Madrid. Also, like to thank Larry Burns, Director of Council on Hemispheric Affairs, and author of Bank to the Future and founder of banktothefuture.com, Simon Dixon there. Thank you for your statements, and thank you, the viewer, for watching another edition of Press TV News Analysis. Any comments or suggestions, do send it to newsroom@presstv.ir. From me, and the entire team, it's goodbye.